принято решение о проведении.
The world is in complete disorder and chaos. The institutions, economic and military, that we had relied on to manage the peace, not just from the end of the Second World War, but well after the Cold War, are now completely on fire. Our rivals, Russia, China, Iran, are testing the global order, not to make it better, but to replace it with an imposition of their own imperial order. Let me take you through how we got here, what are the problems we're facing today, and what the way out might be. Since the end of the Cold War, since the end of the Second World War, Canada has never faced the kind of conflicts that we are in the world today. We're recovering from a global pandemic in which the consensus that we all had about China as a partner is now falling apart. We have an active war in Europe, turning NATO's eastern flank into an eastern front with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Across the world, we are seeing a major geopolitical and economic realignment in which our Canadian interests, our traditional partnerships are all being imperiled and challenged in ways that we had never imagined. Let's go back to where all this began. At the end of the Cold War, you had the whole end of history crowd, the group of people who thought that now that the Soviet Union had collapsed, we can look forward to a time of peace in which democracy would flourish, so too would our societies. We made a deal with the rest of the world that this rules-based order that we would seek to fashion and forge would create prosperity for all. It wouldn't be some dictator around the world deciding the terms of an economic deal or a territorial deal. It would be that we would dialogue. We began dreaming fantastical ideas around the environment and its technologies, around peace in our times. We looked for partnerships rather than peril wherever we found new opportunities. And we began to take people who didn't necessarily have our own best interests at heart at their word, which is a laudable, understandable objective, especially because the Cold War was so taxing and so difficult for so many. We indulged in our idealism. We had a sense at the end of the Cold War that we would experience a peace that we'd never experienced as a world before. There were some reasons to believe in it. It was the longest period of unprecedented growth in human history. Hundreds of millions of people, billions of people were lifted out of poverty through trade and commerce. It was a promising time. In the 2000s, Twin Towers fell because of a terrorist strike from far away. The world became focused on terrorism and its form of fascism as the rival that we needed to fight, cost us huge amounts of capital, time, treasure, and at the expense of a lot of lives that cost us dearly. In the 2010s, we start to see the global order as we had known it begin to crack apart.
Overnight, dozens of armed pro-Russian forces seized control of the international airport and military airport in Ukraine's Crimea region.
We started to see our rivals gathering strength on the proposition that they could maybe one day seize back the order of the world in a way that they would prefer. They began to test that order because they saw weakness in the West. They began to test it by sending little green men across from Russia's border into East Ukraine and seizing Crimea. They began to test it in Hong Kong through the crackdown of the Umbrella Movement and the violation of the basic laws that Hong Kongers were provided both by the CCP in Beijing and by the United Kingdom. Our rivals began to test the limits to which we were prepared to defend the international order of human rights, freedom, democracy, and capitalism that we had built. So here we are. We are seeing an actual mechanized invasion of a sovereign country by Russia. China realized its potential as our rival by weaponizing commerce. They're taking us by the nose because they think that we're weak and broken and that we don't have the willpower and the realistic assessment of the world as it is to confront them. So much of the world that we live in now could have been prevented if we had not built it on wishful thinking. When you think of the war in Ukraine today, had Canada been able to reduce European dependency on Russian gas by getting our stuff from out under the ground and into their markets, we're a stable long-term provider. Not only would we have reduced Russia's capacity to finance its war in Ukraine, we would have also been able to ensure the long-term stability and prosperity of our partners in Europe. Had we actually taken seriously the threats that Russia had made about Ukraine, we knew that they were never interested in just stopping in the Donbass or at Crimea. Their stated objective was always to bring the entire country of Ukraine under their thumb. When you think about what Canada and our people, our country could have been contributing to shape a sustained peace, it's the truest tragedy that we never rose to the potential of our leadership in the moment that we had to. So where do we go from here? Two things. We have to end experimenting with various versions of appeasement. To confront our rivals, we have to make the decisions to confront our rivals. What I mean is that we need to listen more to our Baltic and our Polish allies, those who are on the front of this war with Russia. We need to double down on their advice and their counsel, because these are countries, these are nations, these are peoples who understand what it means to live next to a rival. So we need to learn the lessons of not appeasing dictators and their neo-imperial ambitions. Second, Canada can displace Russian gas in Europe. Canada can displace Russian oil in the Pacific. We can decide to do these things today. In the last 8 months, Germany has built massive pipeline infrastructure and port infrastructure. They've dealt with the fantasy coming to an end that natural gas and uranium are now classified as green technologies. Who would have thought? But what Canada has not done is that we have not reciprocally built the pipelines and port infrastructure to get our energy to hungry European markets looking for a better partnership, because a deal with Russia has gotten that bad. That would also have a massive consequence in the Russian treasury. We can end that type of revenue that the Russians rely on to wage this unjust and horrifying war. If we can end the tanker ban and legislation that is arbitrarily and ideologically imposed, if we end bad decisions based on fantasies, then we can displace Russian oil revenue in the Indo-Pacific and provide cleaner, greener, Canadian-made energy to the countries that require a better partner than Russia has proven it to be. I want people in Ottawa to understand that on their desks, they have the power and the opportunity to make leadership-defining decisions that will shape the course of history for the next 50 years. But one more thing. We need to start leveling up our security commitment to our European allies, including in places like Latvia, where we have hundreds of Canadian women and men working with our Latvian partners to defend not just their borders, but also support the training of Ukrainians who are fighting the fight in their own country. Whether it's light armored vehicles or being able to provide them the capital to purchase drones so that they can secure their airspace, that they can secure their skies. We should also be thinking about how we help Ukraine rebuild after the war. Canada is a world-class financial center. All the capital that we have held from Russian oligarchs, all of this is in defense of the rules-based international order that is in the interests of Canada. So true Canadian doctrine are three things: the security and sovereignty of our people, the prosperity of our people and the partnerships that take our goods and services to the markets that are yearning for it, and cooperation with those who share our values, democratic countries that understand how a shared basis of mutual security provides for a shared basis of mutual prosperity in the freedoms we enjoy, the creativity we love, and the kind of homes we want to build for all of our societies. And until that happens, our country will continue to drift without a sense of direction and without a sense of purpose. And that is not the kind of Canada that most Canadians know. At the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, we exist to provoke a national debate on the interests of Canada and the interests of Canadians. The one good thing we get from social media is the opportunity to invite you to engage us. It's an open conversation as Canadians that we can have, and I'm really delighted that we have the chance to invite you to be part of it. And as always, thanks for watching.